Hey guys, welcome out to Level Up Your Leadership with me, John Barrett, where I'm going to give you leadership lessons in a visual way to help you get better in all that you do. I want to talk to you about the assumption gap. This is huge. Listen, this will kill your organization when it comes to teamwork, when it comes to being able to work together and get things done in order to build a great culture within your team, within your department, within your entire organization. And what happens is this: whenever we've got two people, and we work together, we're on the same team and that. Listen, here's what I've always said. Where two or more are gathered, there will be problems. Whenever you've got two people together, there's just going to be issues. That's not a negative statement. That's just to say that there's going to be problems. It's going to happen. But here's what happens whenever there's conflict, whenever there's an issue, whenever there's problems, is the assumption gap takes place. In the lack of knowledge, then we fill the gap with truth. For example, if there is an issue and this person has an issue with this person for whatever reason, what happens is we begin to question, why did that take place? What were they thinking? Why did they do that? And what happens is when there's a lack of understanding and communication and a lack of knowledge, what we do is we fill the gap. We fill the gap with our story. And we start making assumptions about why they did what they did, why that's taking place, what's behind it, all that. We just begin to go crazy about it. And this assumption gap in the middle is what kills relationships. It's what kills organizations. Because if you don't close that gap, if you don't quickly close that gap, you will fill it in with your narrative. And listen, let me tell you, when it usually gets filled in with your narrative, even if you're a positive person, it's probably not going to be accurate. It's going to go the wrong way. In fact, if you're a really positive person, you'll fill all the assumption in with good things. Oh, they were just having a bad day. It's no big deal. They didn't really mean that, or they don't really act like that. When in reality, they do, and it needs to be addressed. But you're believing the best, and you're overlooking, and you're being blind to real issues that are there potentially. Or if you're a little bit more of a pessimistic person, and that, what it is, you can begin to fill that narrative in with kind of a horror story, like a tragedy, like it's bad news. I mean, they're out to get me and they've got, intentions behind this that are horrible. I mean, you begin to fill in that gap. So listen, if you're going to begin to work together with other people as a leader, you got to make sure that you're not living in the assumption gap. You got to close that thing. You can't let this thing grow because it's like the blob. It just gets bigger and bigger. In fact, the more the story goes on, the bigger the story gets. It's kind of like when you go fishing and you get a little bass, and then before you know it, the bass is kind of turned into a swordfish, and then the swordfish to a tarpon, and that to a shark, and then to a whale, and you get the point. It just grows and grows. In fact, if you're not careful, here's what you'll do. You'll be a journalist. You'll be a novelist. You'll go into this whole assumption gap and you'll start writing a story. Just like a novelist will write a big story and fill in all the gaps and all the details about the characters, why they were doing what they were doing. That's what you'll do. You'll start filling in all the gaps, making all kinds of assumptions about that person and why they did what they did. And you will go to town on this thing. And depending on your personality, that could either be a tragedy, horror story, and that, or it might be a little bit pie in the sky kind of fantasy story that isn't real. So you've got to understand that instead of being a novelist, here's what I want you to think about. Be a journalist. See, there's a big difference between a novelist and a journalist. A novelist fills in all the story and the gaps, and that's their job, to write this big story that's epic and big and all that. But a journalist, what do? No. They just go into the conversation and they don't have any preconceived ideas. They just go in and they ask questions. Help me understand. What did you feel? What happened here? What was your account? What took place? Give me your perspective. That's what a journalist does. Listen, if you'll go into this thing not as a novelist but as a journalist, then here's the deal. You're going to close the gap very quickly so that there's no gap. You don't want this gap to go on because the story gets bigger. So very quickly, both of you have got to come to the middle right here and close the gap and just say, hey, listen, tell me your side of it. Tell me your perspective. What happened? Be a journalist. If you'll do this, guys, you'll begin to change the whole climate in your organization. The whole communication structure of your organization. Instead of letting things get out of control and all these assumptions be made, you'll begin to come together and close the gap and have great conversation. But it's not going to happen unless you recognize this and talk about it. It can't just be one person willing to come to the middle and have the conversation, but the other person does not. They say, no, I'm not willing to do it. You've got to create a culture in your team, in your organization, where you say, hey guys, listen, if we're going to work together as a team, we've got to come together in the middle and close all the gaps. As soon as something happens, we address it. We don't let the story get big. We don't let it grow. We don't become a novelist and go to town in our head about the story. No. We come together and we become a journalist, and we seek to understand, and then we'll be understood, as Stephen Covey taught us so many years ago. You come in, seek to understand, then to be understood. And so if you'll do that, you're going to close that gap. Guys, this is a huge epidemic that's going on in many relationships. It's going on in businesses and organizations. Doesn't matter what industry it's in. This is taking place. If you'll squelch that and you'll create a culture where we work to come together and you teach to it, you train to it, you hold people accountable to it, you don't allow this to go on, you are going to begin to create a great culture where people are going to come together and work in a better environment. That's not to say that when we come together, we're coming at it aggressively and that. It just means that we're willing to come as a journalist. Again, a journalist just comes in with a blank slate and just says, help me understand. What were you thinking? What happened here? What was your eyewitness account? They're not agreeing with it or disagreeing with it. They're just writing down what it is. If you'll do that, you'll create a great culture, guys, and it's going to help your organization be more successful, because when you get culture right, then strategy and all the other things will begin to fall into place. But you get culture wrong, it doesn't matter how good your strategy is or anything. In fact, Peter Drucker, the famous father of modern day management, is what he's called. Years ago, Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you don't have the right culture, you're not going to be successful. How do you have the right culture? You eliminate these assumption gaps and you create a culture of feedback and come together and communication and teamwork, and you're going to begin to move forward. Go to johnbarrettleadership.com to check out all my other resources. You can get a level up guide where you can talk about this. It's got group questions where you can watch this video with you and your team, and you can talk about, hey, how can we close that? Where are we doing this? How can we become more of a journalist and not a novelist? How can we begin to work together so that we get good communication? It's going to help walk you through that as a guide where you can all sit down and have great discussion and begin to work on the things that you want to do in order to get better. So go check it out at johnbarrettleadership.com.
Reach out to us today so we can help take you and your team to the next level.